Let's go to our first panel discussion then. This is what I'm really looking forward to. That is the AI Revolution Forum. Our guests today are Alejandra Leon Moreno, Industry Solutions Worldwide Delivery Lead, Data and AI, OpenAI, and Head of Architecture at Microsoft. We have Ross Sleight, Chief Strategy Officer, Europe, Middle East and Africa at CI&T. And also joining us, we have Alex Boere, AI and Automation Partner at Infosys Consulting. Hello, welcome to all of you. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Hi.
Hello, great to be here.
Great to see you all. And there is a lot for us to dig into here. So without much further ado, let's get stuck into this, and do make sure you send your questions through on the app as well. I'll start with what is always the elephant in the room, I suppose, when it comes to AI, and that when it comes to ethical concerns. And I'll open this up to all of you. For you, what do you see as the main ethical concerns when it comes to AI, and how can we make sure they're developed and deployed in a way that aligns with our values? And I'll start with Alec, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a number of different things you need to be thinking about when we're considering ethical concerns. I mean, obviously bias and fairness in terms of what the models are creating. I think there is also, I've been working in this space solidly 100% for the last 7 years, and really the explainability part is also, and that transparency in terms of it's not a black box, especially with GPT. Then we think about privacy, because people put data in the cloud. Now they want to go and put it into another model. So how do we then manage that element with regard to data? I guess the other aspect is really a lot of people are talking about, and even had their colleagues, son talking about this while being depressed about, well, I'm not going to have a job in the future. So there's the whole consideration with regard to job displacement. And I guess latterly, with regard to that AI statement that was released recently, is really around the security and illicit use of AI. How are organisations, how governments managing this? So it's we're reducing the risk with regard to what AI can pose countries, businesses, people.
Alejandra?
Yeah, I mean, similar angle. I think inclusiveness, it's an important one. For example, what we see sometimes is, especially with engineering and people that are developing these AI systems, there is not a lot of minority groups. There is no women included as well, or it's not the same amount of people participating in these projects like men. So we see that we have several ways at Microsoft that we are trying to decrease that. So we are trying to include everyone, that they are part of the solution. Also, privacy and security, it's important. That's embedded in our systems, enterprise security, transparency, and I think we are all accountable, right? AI systems will be deployed with different customers, different institutions. Microsoft is accountable, but also customers are accountable, and so on. So it's everyone coming together and taking responsibility. Mm-hmm.
And Ross, I'll come to you last on this one.
Thank you. Yeah, so I totally agree. I mean, there's a list longer than your arm of ethical concerns that we need to think about. Focused on our individual businesses, on our sectors, and then moving further out into societal impacts, and then really into humanity impacts, really, because we're dealing here with systems which we don't quite understand in any way how they are getting to solutions and to results. And that becomes a big issue with regards to data transparency and accountability, and provides it quite difficult to begin to start to think about how we regulate those systems, and it comes down to it. But on a humanity scale, you're starting to think about what happens when we lose control and autonomy to systems that we don't quite understand. That raises quite a fundamental ethical set of issues, and how we deal with that as we go and scaffold around that with regards to governance and regulation. I think we're dealing with quite a sort of Promethean moment here, as accessibility to these technologies is greater than ever. And application of them is greater than ever. So we're in a point whereby, there's as much to think about before we rush forward, and the problem is the exponential growth of the development of these systems is making it very difficult for us to keep up, to even ask some of these basic ethical questions. You know, we've been asking these questions for decades, I would say, within the AI industry, and we still haven't got to significant conclusions about how to deal with this. But we've got exponential growth of development happening at the same time, which puts additional pressure on.
And it's that growth I want. Sorry, if I could just expand on this slightly, because we've been talking about that growth and the Promethean moment and so forth, because AI really has broken through into the public consciousness now. It's connected to pretty much every news story that you cover. How important is it the messaging from the industry is clear and sensible and informed when it's actually going out to the wider public in this scenario? Because, as I said, that growth, that moment is now upon us. Alejandra, I'll start with you on the messaging. I'm not sure if Alejandra can hear me. I'll start with you on this one, Alec, then, please, on the message.
Yeah, no problem. No, sure. I mean, I think a lot of this is around actually, I guess, awareness of really what AI is. There is going to be a lot of people, I mean, large language models are really taking AI to the mainstream. You know, ChatGPT, people using this in classes, teachers finding out students. I think, really, there are some steps in the EU they're talking about from a regulation perspective. This is risk-based, making sure we've got standards in terms of transparency and compliance. But a lot of this is really going to come down to, how people are seeing this playing out in the various different aspects in terms of their days. I think, there needs to be you can't hold it back. It's going to happen. Society will be, in the same way when things changed, when people started to get access to services like Google with research. So there's, the expanse of all that information, not in books anymore, but accessible via the internet. It's another dawn in terms of actually where we cyber technology can actually change the ways that we work, but then there'll be other gaps in terms of where it's creating new opportunities, as well as also allowing economies to grow. But I think there's a regulation perspective, but there's also certainly this thing where actually people, and I know OpenAI was started really in terms of looking at the ethics of being responsible, but I think really. That awareness is what is going to be the challenge over the coming months and years with regard to actually how is it playing out, what type of use cases are people starting to adopt. I mean, I've been working in this space for a long time, and there's been a lot of talk about AI, not a lot of doing in some regards. Obviously, there's pockets of this, but it could really transform organizations and businesses if you really get this front to back in terms of your business. But really, there are lots of challenges in the way of doing that. But I think really just making sure people are fully aware of really what how we're deploying it, how we're kind of explaining what it's doing, and really those privacy concerns is paramount. So it's a lot about awareness, I would say.
Yeah, I think to pick up on that, I think that so in terms of messaging from the industry, I think there's two things. Number one is I'm a little bit bored of seeing Terminator style pictures accompanying every single article saying AI is going to kill us in 2 years. I think was the one in the Times a couple of days ago. I mean, there is, but in a way that does a very interesting job, which is it raises the agenda from being a technology like social media, which has major effects on societal and behavioral issues, and yet is not considered to be, it's almost considered to be benign when it first came out. Whereas, with AI, we see this now as a threat, and it depends entirely on how we want to counter that. In the same way as climate change, is a major threat, but it's taken a long time for this to become a reality. And it's only when we see, New York and the whole of the East Coast completely, covered by the smog of forest fires that we start to pay attention to this. It's very difficult to do that same thing within AI, apart from having killer robots and sci-fi films on that basis. But as always, sci-fi gives you the opportunity to be able to go and explore futures that are not based in today's reality, and think about a sort of stream of consciousness to be able to get to a point whereby you can imagine a different world. And so they're very good for that. So I think what we've got to realize is that it has a major impact, and because it's now raised up in awareness, when we start to use AI embedded into applications, embedded into things like, into Photoshop, or embedded into the Office suite, or into the base, we're going to be using AI, and we're going to have to start thinking about the fact that we actually are using AI in this basis for positive, empowering, productivity enhancing ways. At the same time, we've got this, we need everyone to be aware, humanity, regulators, everyone to be aware of the fact that this exponential growth leads us into areas where we don't know how generative AI is working today, and why it's coming back with what it's coming back with. And that's likely to increase is if we put more and more and more computing power and training data and everything behind it. It's likely to make, who knows when a leap will happen. We don't know when that leap will happen, but we need to be aware of when that leap happens, or before that leap happens, that we've got the right guide rails of how we deal with this, in the same way as we've done with nuclear and chemical weapons, right? There is an existential threat here that we have to be aware of, and we have to take as not just a country or a business perspective, on a whole or society perspective, but just in a whole human perspective as to how we deal with the potential inevitabilities, which are many branched in terms of where the future will lead us to.
Now, I'm not sure if we've got Alejandra back. I'm not sure.
I just lost you for a second, but yeah, back.
Fantastic. Yeah. So if I start you on the messaging there as well, your thoughts on how important it is we actually get the messaging right, because it's now really entered the public consciousness.
Yeah, I think it's extremely important, and I echo all the comments that have been done. It's very important to integrate AI by design. In Microsoft, for example, everything that is created follows certain principles like fairness, reliability, safety, privacy and security, inclusiveness, transparency, and accountability. But obviously all these AI systems feed from customers' data. So it's important that that data also has certain compliance. We need to think in frameworks, how we are going to deal with this. So the responsibilities from everyone. We are seeing AI embedded in all our systems. So we have OpenAI at Microsoft, but we are also embedding OpenAI into our different products. So all the Microsoft suite of products, we are releasing that with Copilot. So we see the same with other companies as well, that they are doing that. So it will be integrated in almost all the products at one point. So I'm thinking of a framework, something that is bigger than ourselves, and goes beyond just one company, but to different institutions, I think is clear as well. It's the way forward in order to avoid problems. Mm-hmm.
I think that's the challenge which we've got as businesses or institutions. We need to develop those frameworks for ourselves and our stakeholders. We need that governance in place to be able to think about these questions, not down to an individual within who's responsible in terms of like data security, because it flows across every single department, every single silo within a business has the ability to be able to apply. But how do we apply it for good for all of our stakeholders? And how do we do that in a way which is positive, for our business? And that's going to, that is the responsibility of business and institutions. It's also the responsibility of governments and regulatory bodies to be able to provide other forms of frameworks. But we can't just say it's your job to go and do the framework. Every business should be looking at the governance of this and the ethical approaches to this and the stance that they want to take for every single stakeholder today. That's probably the biggest way to begin to start that journey now, if you haven't already started it, as well as the obvious way of experimentation and trialing out and doing everything there. That's the challenge I would pose for businesses, is get that governance framework started and discussed within your businesses.
Let's dig into the regulation and the governance there, because it's something you've all mentioned, I think, on more than one occasion. Let's think about how's best this going to be applied. Is this best done nation by nation, business by business, region by region? Should it be worldwide regulations? Let's open the book on this. What do you think is going to be the best way, in a perfect world, which we'd all love, to actually try and get some kind of regulation framework to work alongside this revolution?
I mean, right now you've got the EU's just released their starting point. I mean, obviously this has been going on for the last few years in terms of its adjustment, and the most recent statement is really around, for example, we can't use facial recognition in public spaces. But I think really this is multifaceted. Organisations and themselves and those industry sectors need to have a handle on actually what they think is right, because it's specific to their type of industry and their business, and really how does that foster in your business's culture. So I think everyone should start to be developing those frameworks, as Ross was talking about earlier, with regard to those specifics in terms of how it applies to yourself. I think that there's multiple different aspects to this, but its government has to be front and center, and you don't want it to not stifle the innovation that this can deliver. UK as an organisation, as a country, is struggling a little bit right now, but I think these things are going to help us be more effective and efficient as a country than that too with the businesses. So I think you need to do this on your own, as well as also be listening to what others are doing in your sector, as well as also what the government's doing, UK, Europe, and the globe.
I think from my perspective that it needs global agreement on definitions, on sort of proliferation, on the ability to be able to do it, and in the same way that we have done in so many ways through UN mandates and aspects of that. We need some. There is no point us doing everything brilliantly in the EU with regards to providing safe regulation, and then another state doing something completely different, because we're a global. Everything is global now with regards to business, and we're in a position whereby competitiveness, shareholders are going to want to see you as operating within the ability to be able to take the advantage of all the real massive positives of AI, as we talked about, in terms of productivity, in terms of insight and everything that we can gain from that. But ultimately, we're going to need global guide rails, which can then be implemented at more regional political levels down to country levels. But whilst we're waiting for that to happen, and that's well above my pay grade, and being able to say how we go about that basis, we as individual businesses, institutions and sectors and trade bodies can begin to start to say, what do we want to do and how do we feel?
Yeah, I know that's the point I was making. I mean, it's going to take a long time for that global aspect. As long as your business has a good understanding of what it means for you, that's certainly your starting point. And obviously seeing how things develop and where people test and learn with regards to the application of technology in their businesses, the business processes with their customers.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
Sorry, Alan.
Yeah, no, I think it's, like if you think in GDPR, for example, like in Europe, it took a long time to come into place, and probably was like different iterations of the law, because if you see the restrictions that has to be plotted against the capabilities of different products, like in the marketing stack, for example, like you can track cookies and you can go into different levels of tracking and so on. So that will be a big angle of the framework, I will say. But I think in order to start, you have to start from each company, their data, the process, having that internal framework as well related to what they do. I think it's important, and then all coming together in place as well. But definitely something that is quite holistic, I think, will be the way forward.
And I think regulation as well. You need to have a combined set of definitions. So we need to define, for example, what intelligence means. And everyone agree on that. But but you also need to be able to enforce that regulation, which is the biggest issue. There's no point putting guide rails out if they're not enforceable. So, how do we enforce, regulation on AI research? Do we restrict training data? Do we restrict computational power? There's a whole set of issues as to how we deal with something. And I say I wouldn't like to be in regulators' shoes right now, because I think there is a significant challenge to be able to articulate, even at a definition level, as to what we're dealing with here and how we can then begin to enforce stuff, particularly when this is, quite often the commercial sector and the most powerful commercial entities in the world which are funding and driving this innovation that's going forward. And so what we've got to do is we've got to balance the potential negatives and the potential problems that we see, alongside working with all the positives that we know and feel that can come from AI and that basis. And we've got to be really careful that we're not doom mongering on one side without seeing the benefits. You talked about innovation, we talked about productivity, we talked about the ability to be able to do things that we've never ever dreamt of being able to do. And those positives are the things that we've got to focus on being able to allow to grow at the same time as making sure that it's not used for the negative side of things.
Yeah, these technologies are going to continue to evolve, and the methods really sort of help drive that transparency and accountability will all need to evolve with it. And obviously there's an interplay with regard to what's coming out of academia. There's an interplay with regard to the industry, and obviously there's a huge role from the government to just help police. But I think at the moment, with large language models or LLMs, this has opened the box wall, got people thinking more about the role of AI, but it's also ever present in people's lives already. So I think it's just the challenges of people in terms of seeing what it means in terms of their jobs in the future. I think that's probably one of the biggest things I'm seeing people thinking about.
Alec, that's exactly where I wanted to go next. So thank you for setting that one up for me. Mm-hmm. Because one key question, we've talked about, I think Ross, you said earlier about the doom story that comes out in certain sections of the media about, it's robots taking over the world, all that kind of thing, if they've got a page to fill. The other one is about, they're going to come and take all of our jobs. How do we get the balance right between using the benefits and the incredibly exciting benefits of AI without there being too much job displacement, or it may be going too fast too soon? How do we get that balance right? What are all your thoughts on that?
I think you hit the nail on the head, going too fast too soon. That's the main problem. Every single revolution that we have undertaken as a human race has seen job displacement. So there's going to be job displacement, undoubtedly. The question is, can we generate new jobs quick enough to be able to take the effect of the speed of what that displacement could potentially be? And the first thing I'd say is it's down to businesses to work out for all their stakeholders what they want their policy to be. Do they want their policy to be about increasing productivity, increasing growth? Or do they want their position to be of cutting in order to be able to give short-term financial benefits to shareholders, right? That's what we're talking about. It's a decision at the business level when it comes down to it. Now, I was sitting with my creative director the other day and looking at generative fill, and he was talking about the fact that photographers could well be out of a job very, very quickly with regards to the work which has been done with AI and generative fill on Photoshop and the likes. There are going to be impacts across everything. The question is, how quickly is that going to happen, and how quickly are we prepared to let it happen at a business and a societal level? Because we're in a position whereby we've got to be able to ensure that whatever we are doing is going to be positive for all our stakeholders. And in doing so, that means how can we help them do their jobs better and give them the ability to be able to go and spend more time doing things which are probably more enjoyable? Because right today, AI is pretty much about taking meniality out of jobs and automating things that people don't enjoy doing. So how can we do things which are more exciting, more positive, more opportunities for innovation? That at an individual business level is a decision that everyone has to make, or an institution has to make. But also we've got to be careful about the basis that just because we can doesn't mean that we should. And so in doing so, we need to self-regulate the ability to ensure that all the new opportunities and the new positivity and the new ways of doing growth and innovation are seen as a positive thing, not just as a cost-saving, short-term, quarter finance hitting based objective, which is where, I personally see one of the biggest existential threats of AI is AI activist investors coming on saying you should be using AI more and more in order to be able to cut from the business. That will be one of the biggest problems of forcing companies to do things that they don't really want to be able to do to meet activist shareholder requirements. But I don't. Ali, what do you think?
I mean, I think there's other aspects to consider. Certainly with regard to what the role of the government is, educational institutions. I mean, from an education, with the dawn of Gen AI, it's not just appeared; it's been around for a while. But I think it actually reinforces the point with regard to lifelong learning. It's been more important than ever. To allowing people to gain these new skills, but actually how do they adopt these in terms of their workplace? But there's certainly on a business front, what does this look like in terms of job redesign? How do we kind of change the way that we kind of do these things? And making sure, I guess from the government side is really, I mean, if we've got less people working because of AI, then where's the tax dollars coming from? What things they should be regulating? How do they create, especially with tax and those social safety nets for people in terms of what these look like? But it's also going to create new jobs. I think it's going to create new ways we do things in the same way that when we had the pandemic, right? we created new ways to go and work, and there's more hybrid working now, not everybody going into the office, and obviously that creates its own challenges. But these things will not just come at us overnight. They'll be gradual, and you start to see. We're certainly seeing we're creating new job roles in terms of what we need in terms of to support our clients with regards to the business based on what's happening. I think more of that will happen.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking from the other angle as well. I think jobs will evolve. Like sort of how you learn things will evolve as well. If I reflect, I studied computer science, and at that time I need to program everything, it was nothing like Copilot that I can just use and start to pull different pieces of code, and then, I can add on top of that. I have to do the boring stuff, which was quite repetitive. And then start to create my own stuff that gave me some joy. So I think if we see in that way, I think all the jobs will evolve. There is some things that will be automated and new things will appear. So I think it's also thinking that way, how you can evolve and change, and what parts of your job are really things that don't require critical thinking. I think critical thinking is going to become very important in the future. I
think of it, you've got autopilot. Technology is doing something where the humans out of the loop, but I think there's more and more of a focus in terms of Copilot. You've got you're doing your job role, you've got an AI twin that's sitting next to you, helping you be more efficient and effective in terms of what you do. You can then be focusing on the creative tasks. Yes, Gen AI is going to help with regard to knowledge democratization, the knowledge workers, the content creators, those types of people, in terms of actually, because it's flipping that on the head to a certain degree in terms of more linear processes. But I think, it's businesses need to grow. That's their target. How do you drive that growth? Technology is one angle. People, cutting costs with regard to putting people offshore is a big part of what we do as an organisation. These things are going to happen, and it's more of a case of how do we go through those steps to adjust with the times in terms of what this technology really can bring to organisations and the economy.
We are starting to run out of time, so I just want to get in one question from our audience that has come in. This is from Safin, and this is again another big talking point when it comes to AI and the revolution, and that is its use within education. What are your thoughts on the balance between using AI and embracing AI in the education space, with the ethical boundaries of people popping an essay title into AI and getting a piece of work done for them, which I know my son has tried to do on several occasions already. One, I was impressed he knew what AI was. I was less, in fact, impressed the fact he tried to do it. But how do you see that balance there?
I've been working with the largest university in Europe for the last few years, and they're predominantly they're distance learning, but we've been working with them on this technology, and I think there's different aspects in terms of where this technology can bring itself. It can help with that personalized learning, helping better understand what is the right thing for that particular learner to learn, and also adjust that. Obviously that the consideration with regard to lifelong learning. I think we also use that technology to help people write better essays, but I think it's a bit like when Google came out, when it's now more around the critical thinking. So it's a different way in terms of how people need to think. And this is what we talked about earlier, wasn't it, Ross? But I think, higher ed, future, further education need to sort of embrace this, and there are tools to counteract what people are doing, and certainly that's going to be happening. But is it really important to be able to write an essay? And there's some big fundamental questions in academia with regard to how are you assimilating information? How are you better on making the right decisions on what you've been able to use these tools to do? I think it's going to be difficult, certainly in some areas of specialisms where you need to go through start at the base and come through to the top with regard to actually learning and understanding what's going on, as opposed to right now where you could probably go straight to the end game and not understanding why.
I think that's a great answer. I think my view is that we talked a lot about in 15 years ago, decade ago, about industries that were being fundamentally changed by digital technologies, and I think that education is still to be fundamentally changed by digital technologies, and AI is going to be something that will force it to begin to wrap around the current needs and future needs of students of any age, never mind about the fact that it's not it's a system that has been centuries old in terms of how it is done. I'm not saying it's not been innovative in how it's approaching things, but those things such as lifelong learning, the principle of exams and regurgitation versus critical thinking, those are questions which the system is going to have to ask itself, and the institutions are going to have to ask themselves as to how they operate. And I think that we'll see some great steps forward, again, embracing and empowering the technology rather than fighting against it. Because there's one thing that we know from digital per se is you can't fight against the technology. You've got to work with it and use it to your advantage, and the advantage of every single stakeholder. And that's where I think that we'll see some great innovation coming forward with that.
Alejandra, I'll give you the final word on this.
Yeah, there is going to be disruption in different industries, and I think education will be one of them as well, as we see. So it's going to be an evolution of, what it can be automated, a rethink of, how you achieve that critical thinking as well. I think it's early stages to know all the answers around this, but what we discussed before, having that framework, thinking that different angles, coming from different perspectives, will bring that clarity into what is next. And we have seen disruption of many industries. I think in education has been one of the industries that has been disrupted the least, I will say. So that probably will change in the future. Yeah.
Okay, Alejandra, Ross, Alec, thank you so much for your time. We could carry on all afternoon. I feel like we haven't even scraped the surface of this one yet. So thank you all so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And thank you for joining us here at Tech Live London.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.